Hello, sweet friends. Today we are going to talk about the Salamander Room, and we're going to learn some really neat and interesting facts about the salamander. But first, let's just talk about the story a little bit. There's a little boy named Brian, and Brian must really like these little salamanders because he catches one and he takes it home and he wants it to live with him. But of course, his mommy asks him, well, how are you going to take care of this salamander? What are you going to do to make sure that it can survive? And so Brian tells his mommy he has all kinds of ideas and he knows everything that that salamander needs to survive. He brings in logs and he brings in wet leaves and he makes little pools of water and he brings in insects and bugs, and by the time he is finished, he has turned his whole bedroom really into the forest, hasn't he? But he has thought of everything. Wouldn't it be neat if we could really turn our room into a habitat like that? Well, I am going to tell you some really cool things about salamanders. First, the word salamander comes from the Greek language and it means fire lizard. And the reason that they came up with this name was that when the Greeks were making fires, if they would pick up a log and throw it into the fire, sometimes these little creatures would crawl out. And they looked kind of like lizards, but they knew that they weren't lizards. They knew there was something a little bit different about them. But these little things would scurry out whenever the logs were thrown into the fire. So they called them fire lizards. Um, Salamanders are nocturnal. Do you remember that word? We have talked about that before. I know we talked about it when we did owl moon because owls are nocturnal. What does that mean? Do you remember? It means that they sleep during the day, yes, and so they are active at night. So that is when salamanders are hunting and doing all of the fun things that a salamander does at night when you and I are sleeping. Some salamanders can be poisonous and some can have teeth. But I know that all of the salamanders that my boys, when they were younger, and Travis now, if he comes across salamanders here in the Virginia woods, they have always been ones that they can handle and touch, and sometimes they would put them in jars and keep them for a little bit before they would release them. The largest salamander in the world can be found in China and it is called the Chinese giant salamander, and it can be about 5 feet long. So that is almost as big as I am. I'm about 5'3" tall. So, whoo, that is a big salamander. I'm not so sure I would want to come across that in the wild. Most of the salamanders in the world live in North America and South America. So here is our map. See if you can point to North America and South America. All right, did you find it? North America, this is where we live, and South America. That's where most of the salamanders can be found. And then a really cool thing, God designed these little creatures so that if one of their legs comes off in a battle with a predator, or if a little toe falls off, or even if part of their tail falls off, they can grow a new one back. Isn't that so special that God did that for them as a way to help protect them? Now, salamanders live either in the water or near the water. If they live near the water up on the ground, they want it to be kind of a moist place, like they might live under a rock near a pond or near a river or a stream. Some live in water their entire life. Some live in water and on land, kind of going back and forth. And some live on land the whole time. But again, those that live on land still need to be around that moisture. Their skin actually needs some of that moisture. So, Mrs. Mo mentioned before that they are amphibians. So, what is an amphibian? Well, an amphibian is a particular group of animals that all have certain things true about them. And that first thing is that they are called cold-blooded. That means, and we talked about this when we were doing the story When I Was Young in the Mountain. And remember, we talked about snakes a little bit. And snakes are cold-blooded. Um, but snakes are not amphibians, but they are also cold-blooded. Anyway, what that means is that their blood can adjust to whatever temperature they are in. So that if they are in a colder area, their blood just adjusts and they can be in that cold area. Or if they're in um, a warmer area, their blood can adjust a little bit that way. Amphibians always lay their eggs in water. And when they lay those eggs, just like I mentioned before, each egg is very soft and it has like a little jelly, clear jelly around it. Once those eggs hatch, the baby that comes out doesn't look very much like the grown up. If you will think of a frog. If you have ever seen a little tiny tadpole, that tadpole swims around and it's born in the water, but then it grows legs and it gets rid of its tail and then it hops out and then it is a frog and it lives on the land. A frog is another type of amphibian. So that is what is true about amphibians. They lay their eggs in the water, and when the eggs hatch, it is in the larva stage is what it is called, and that larva does not look like the adult. It takes a little while for it to change. So while they're living in the water, they are born with gills, and those are special structures that they have that help them breathe underwater. And then as they grow and change, those gills actually disappear and their lungs develop inside of their body. So then they can breathe air on the land. So frogs and toads and salamanders are all amphibians. And salamanders eat bugs, just like Brian brought some bugs into his room. They eat insects, they eat worms, they eat snails, and they might even eat small fish like tiny little tadpoles or little things like that. So when the time comes in the spring for them to lay eggs, they will go to a water source and they'll jump in the water or swim down and they will lay eggs in tiny little clusters, and they'll lay them either on leaves or branches or rocks that are in the water. A female will lay about 100 eggs before her job is done. But after she lays them all, then she leaves the water, and the eggs are left on their own to hatch. After about 30 days, the eggs hatch. And that baby salamander, it looks a lot like a little tadpole, except there is something different about it. It has little gills sticking out of its head, and they look like feathers. Can you see this picture? This is a real live picture. I didn't have as much ink in my printer, so it kind of looks a little off, but those are the gills sticking out of its head, and those are what help it to breathe underwater. Then, after about 20 days of swimming around, looking like a tadpole with these little feathery things sticking out of their head, then they begin to grow legs. So now you can see the little legs on our baby salamander. And once those legs grow, then they can either crawl along the bottom of the pond or the river or wherever they live, or they can still swim because they still have a tail um, like like a tadpole does. So they can swim or they can crawl. Now, after 60 days, their gills completely disappear. So all those feathery things coming out of their head, they shrink and they disappear. And their lungs inside of their body develop. Their arms and their legs are grown. That swimming fin has been replaced by just a tail. And now they look like a very tiny adult. And this one, they can actually even be smaller than this. They can be 2 to 3 inches long when they reach the adult stage. And then it can take them about 2 years before they reach their final size. Now, Brian in the story, he creates a habitat for his little salamander that he caught. And we have talked about habitats before, and you have created some habitats. And I want to challenge you this week to create a salamander habitat. So, first of all living things need 4 things to exist. They need air, they need food, they need water, and they need shelter. So when you are creating a habitat for your salamander, remember those things that that salamander is going to need. So maybe, and this is why Mrs. Moe was collecting all of those boxes and box lids at school, and we never got to use them at school, and I'm so sorry about that. But maybe you can gather another box or a box lid and create a habitat. You would need some sort of water source. Maybe you could paint a little creek or a little river. You could maybe use some blue glitter or something to make the water look sparkly. Maybe you could go outside and collect some things to put into your habitat. You could collect little pebbles or little rocks. You could collect pieces of moss, little twigs, little leaves, different things. Think about what a salamander would need in order to live and in order um, to survive. Now, when it comes to having the salamander for your habitat, when if you can get mom or dad to go to Walmart in the fishing department, you can actually buy little fishing lures, and there some of them actually are lizards, but we can just pretend that they are salamanders. Or they do sell salamanders too, but they're just a little harder to find. But you could pretend, just use your imagination. Or maybe you already have one in a little toy collection that you have. Or you could make one out of paper or even Play-Doh. So maybe you can create your own salamanders and their habitat. And don't forget that they're going to need some food. So maybe you could create some little bugs or some little tiny fish in the water that they could eat. One last thing that I want to share with you about this story, and that is a Bible verse. In the book of Job, chapter 12, verses 7 through 10, Job is talking to his friends about the beauty and wonders of God's creation. And he says this, "But ask the wild animals, and they will teach you. Speak to the earth, and let it teach you. In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all men." So Job was reminding his friends and reminding us that all we need to do is look at the wild animals of the earth, just like the salamander, and we can learn about God because we can see the wonderful design in the way God created things for our enjoyment and to show his power and glory. I sure am God. We sure am glad we serve such an amazing God, aren't you?